is up, movie fans? My name is Andrew, aka Noezone, and today I'm going to be giving y'all my spoiler-free review on Superman. And Superman was my most anticipated movie going into 2025, so I definitely had some high expectations going in. And y'all are about to find out in a little bit if it lived up to those expectations for me. But just before that, if you like any movie-related content just like this, consider subscribing to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And make sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoy my review. Also, if you are a returning viewer of the channel, don't mind the background and stuff. I just moved, so I have not gotten my new office set up correctly yet. It's a work in progress, and you'll see over the next month or so it develop as it goes. But with all that out of the way and without any further ado, let's get into the spoiler-free review. Starting out with what I wanted going into this new Superman movie. First up, I wanted a very rewatchable Superman movie because Superman is one of those characters that I don't feel like he has a movie that I just turn on all the time. He doesn't really have those big hitters for me like Spider-Man or Batman when he's the most popular superhero of all time. The closest two movies that I feel like have gotten to that are Superman 78 and Man of Steel. But Superman 78 suffers from old movie pacing and it's 2.5 hours long. Also, I have to watch his origin story over again, which I'm just never interested in doing with Superman. And Man of Steel is a big departure on what I believe the character should be portrayed as, but I do really like it as an Elseworld story. But again, not that rewatchable in my opinion. Second up, I wanted David Corenswet to embody the lighter side of the character just like Christopher Reeve did while making it his own. Third up, I wanted James Gunn to make Superman feel different than his past comic book movie projects, but to still embrace the comic booky fun that those movies and TV shows had. Fourth up, I wanted this movie to keep the focus on Superman and not let the Justice Gang distract us too much in the story. Lastly, the fifth thing, and this was very important to me, is that we finally get a good version of Lex Luthor in a live action movie. Because over the past few months, I've been going through the Superman movies and the Superman animated series and seeing how good the Superman the animated series Lex Luthor is and comparing them to our live action movie Lex Luthor's, it's not even a contest. So going into this movie, I really wanted a good Lex Luthor that I could call my definitive version of the character, at least for a live action movie. But now getting into my thoughts on Superman after watching the movie, starting out with my positives. And my first positive is going to be the story, because this thing is set up just like a comic book is, even with the way the text comes on screen in the beginning of the movie. It's so unapologetically a comic book movie, and I feel like this might be the most comic booky movie I've ever seen. It just really embraces the source material, and I feel like you get thrown right into the action, and there's not really a slow moment until about halfway through the movie, which I'll talk about a little later. And to add on to those previous points, this movie is never afraid to get weird or zany with it, which we know James Gunn has never been shy of that in the past, but in a Superman movie, this is kind of new. This story has a ton of heart to it and just embracing the true goodness of Superman as a character. And I'm very glad that James Gunn chose to go this route with the character after 10 to 15 years of just brooding Superman. And I'm not even counting the evil iterations of Superman that we've seen too. Another thing that I want to praise the story and just the screenplay is that you can actually tell that it was a finished script from the start. And I can really tell that it wasn't butchered in post-production, which is a really good sign for the future of the DCU, and I hope they stick to that precedent. To talk about the characters that I'm positive on, first up is going to be Superman. And I think that they nailed Superman as a character and what actually makes him special. This movie also is the equivalent to the Batman for Batman as a character as Superman is to Superman as a character, because he is Superman for most of the movie, just like Batman was Batman for most of the Batman. I definitely said Batman way too much in that last sentence. But I do like this version of Clark Kent as well. I just wish we saw more of him. This movie definitely has my personal favorite version of the Kents. And it actually felt like people that I knew in real life as someone who lives in the South, even though I know it's supposed to be set in Kansas, but still. Lois Lane is characterized very well in this movie, and I think they did a good job of making her antagonistic at times, while also having to bring her back to Earth sometimes and get her out of her job and actually be a person, which I think makes for a very interesting and flawed character to have on screen, and it's just like Lois Lane in the animated series, in my opinion. This movie definitely lived up to my expectations with the Lex Luthor, because this has my favorite live-action Lex Luthor to date. And before you ask in the comments, I have not watched Smallville, and I know a lot of people love that version of Lex in live action, but as someone who has only really watched the Superman movies and Superman and Lois, this is my favorite live-action Lex. And they made him so hateable in the best ways possible. possible. The Justice Gang I felt like was handled well, and I didn't think they distracted too much from this being a Superman-focused story. Mr. Terrific was definitely the standout of the team, and I can't wait to see more of him. He also has one of my favorite action scenes in the film. I think the way they did Guy Gardner in this movie was good, but I definitely think he could have been way more of an asshole. And judging by what Nathan Fillion has said about his role in Lanterns, I definitely think we'll get that in the future, so I will give this film a pass. Also, this movie was geared more towards families, so I understand the choice. I think Halt Girl was really dope for the amount of screen time she has. And the last character for my positives is going to be Jimmy Olsen, because I really did like his subplot, and it has most of the great humor in the movie. And just like how this Lex Luthor is my favorite version of that character in live action, Jimmy Olsen is that way as well for me. There weren't any characters that I wasn't positive on in the movie, but those were just the ones that I felt like shouting out. And moving on to the acting, and David Corenswet is literally Superman, and I think he has the potential to go down as one of the best comic book movie castings of all time. We just got to see how the future plays out, but he is really good in this movie. I think he plays Superman and Clark Kent to perfection. I just think one of my biggest praises for his performance is that he embodies that lighter side of the character like I wanted going in, while also making him flawed and more relatable in a sense compared to the Christopher Reeve Superman. I think David Corenswet struck a really good balance with his performance as the character by leaning into the aw shucks nature of Superman while also giving him some pretty human moments. Rachel Brosnahan is great as Lois Lane, and I think her standout scene is definitely the interview she has with Superman that was in the trailer. Like I was saying earlier, Lex Luthor in this movie is great, but Nicholas Hoult's performance as Lex is so good. It's also my favorite performance as a Lex Luthor in live action as well. And this movie made it to where I need Nicholas Hoult's Lex Luthor to interact with other DC villains in a possible Legion of Doom or something, because that would be so good. And I think Nicholas Hoult portrayed him perfectly as the world's biggest Superman hater. I think my most surprising performance in this movie is Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific, because he just added so much of a cool factor to Mr. Terrific. And I really mean when I say that, because after this guy's first scene as the character, I was instantly liking him, and I wanted him to get a spin-off project, which apparently might be in the works, so I'm definitely looking forward to that if that becomes a thing. Anthony Carrigan gives a good performance as Metamorpho, just like he does with all of his DC roles. I just think he added a lot of humanity to the character that I really enjoyed. Skylar Garand, I think I'm saying his name right, is Jimmy Olsen in the same way that David Corenswet and Nicholas Hoult are Superman and Lex Luthor for me. And I think he did a good job at playing this version of the character especially. Pruitt Taylor Vince is my favorite version of Pa Kent that we've gotten in live action, and he has some scenes that really made me tear up, and he's just such a lovable old man. And Neva Howell does a good job at complimenting his Pa Kent with her Ma Kent performance, even though her scenes aren't as strong as his. But again, like I said earlier, the characterization and their performances made them my definitive version of the Kents. Another positive I have for this movie is the action. The Superman fight scenes are really good, and I love how well balanced they are with the amount of saves he has, because I feel like that was a big problem I had with Man of Steel, was that I love the action in that movie for Superman, but I feel like he doesn't save enough people. And I feel like this movie struck the perfect balance of that for me, and the extent of the saves he has, and you'll see what I mean once you watch the movie. And I also enjoy specifically how this Superman is actually really creative with the way he fights. It just added a little extra flair to the action scenes. Now to talk about the cinematography, and I really like how dynamic a lot of the camera movements are in this, and it makes a lot of the dialogue and action scenes just feel more snappy and lively. And also another thing is that some of the shots of Superman in this movie are just really dope, and they're some of the best ones that I've seen in any Superman movie. Especially this one shot of him hovering with all this smoke and light beams around him. Dude, I hit this right after that happened. Next up is the CGI, and I feel like the visual effects in this movie look really good because James Gunn wrapped the shooting on this movie really early, especially in comparison to the other movies that were released in July, like Jurassic World and Fantastic Four. And I think it really shows in the final product that he let his visual effects artist cook for a very long period of time, because the kaiju in this movie looks amazing. I really do think Marvel Studios should be taking notes on that specific part of this movie, especially with all the stuff stuff that's come out in recent years about them overworking their visual effects artists and not giving them enough time to work on certain visual effects shots because they can't decide on scenes because they keep working with unfinished scripts, which is also another thing in this movie, that it's actually a finished script. Sorry for the little mini rant, but that's a subject that I feel really strongly about with most comic book movies these days. Moving on to the practical effects, which there's only really one point I gotta say about that, and that's that Metamorpho looks amazing. The sound design in this movie is really well mastered, and you can really feel all the punches during the action scenes, which elevates a lot of the fights. I have some positives and some things I feel mixed on in the score, but just talking about the positives, I do like the rendition of the John Williams score. It feels different enough where I can still associate it with this version of the character while not feeling like a full ripoff. And I really do love the David Fleming tracks on this score specifically, just listening to the album on Spotify and, you know, picking out which ones he made and which ones John Murphy made. And I gotta say, David Fleming definitely did upgrade the score, and I understand fully why James Gunn brought him in after some certain test screenings, because the John Murphy tracks are definitely the weakest ones in my opinion, but I will talk about that more in the mix section. The pacing of this movie for the most part is great, and I feel like from the opening all the way until you get to a certain part of the movie about halfway through, that movie is moving. But that certain sequence in the movie definitely did slow the momentum for me, but on future rewatches, we'll see how that holds up for me. But for the most part, the pacing is a huge positive for me because I do think it's going to help with rewatches knowing that this movie's 2 hours and it does not feel like a 2.5 hour movie. I think for the most part, this movie is edited well, and I think a lot of the dialogue scenes are elevated by it, along with the cinematography like I was mentioning earlier. Another positive for me is going to be the emotional value because this movie has a ton of it. Like I was mentioning earlier with Pa Kent, there's so many scenes that he has with Clark specifically that just make me tear up. And there are some great Superman moments that just give me goosebumps. So this movie made me feel all the emotions that it was supposed to. So I definitely do think the emotional value is one of my biggest positives coming out of this movie. The rewatchability, I'm putting it in the positives just off of a good guess that I do think this will probably be my most rewatched Superman movie, but we will just have to see. This is more of just an educated guess of, I do think that the runtime of this movie being only 2 hours is going to help it, and I think it's one of the best paced Superman movies to date. If not the best, but I do need to hit a couple rewatches to definitively say that. My last positive is going to be a singular James Gunn-ism of the movie that I feel like he held back on respectfully, and that's the needle drops. And there's only a couple, but I feel like the ones that he did use definitely do benefit the story or the scene that it's playing over, not to get into too many spoilers. And I'm glad that the movie was mostly score and not too much soundtrack music, like he has done in the past with his Guardians of the Galaxy movies or the Suicide Squad. But there are definitely some other James Gunn-isms that I'm going to talk about later that I'm not as high on. And that's going to lead me into my mixed section of the review. And these are just the things that I'm just either neutral, or I have some things I like about them and also things that I don't like about them. And first up is going to be the score. Like I said earlier, there are some things about the score that are kind of negative for me. But again, I am mostly positive on the score for this movie. But I don't think there are enough original pieces in it. And a lot of the original pieces that aren't renditions on the John Williams theme are just pretty bland overall, especially most of the John Murphy stuff. But overall, the score is good, but I do think there are some improvements that need to be made if this same team is going to be working on the sequel, if we do get one. And my second and last thing that I have in the mix section is going to be Metamorpho. And I do really like Anthony Carrigan's performance as the character, and I think he added a lot of humanity into it. I also did love his power set. I didn't mention that earlier. His power set is really cool, and I think it could be really awesome in another project where you get to focus on him more. But I just wasn't that satisfied with his emotional moments in the movie because I feel like we cut away a little too much from what was driving his motivations to stay in that part of the movie that he was in. Also, there were just a lot of jokes being thrown around by either him or characters around him during those scenes, and it just kept like bringing me out of the movie a little bit. I just do feel like he had a lot of potential to be one of the glaring positives of this movie, like Mr. Terrific is, but he just didn't really get there for me. But again, like I said earlier, his practical effects look amazing, and Anthony Carrigan does give a good performance. So that's why he's in the mixed section of the review and not the negatives. And that leads me to my negative section of the review, and I only have one clear negative with this movie, and that is this one James Gunn-ism where he inserts jokes into emotional scenes where I feel like it undercuts them a little bit. And there are a good few scenes in this movie where it happens, again, not naming them because of spoiler reasons, but he would insert a joke somewhere where it just had no right being there, and it really cut the emotional value of the scene for me. And I'm glad he did hold himself back a lot in this movie with his humor, but I do think it just needs to be cut almost completely from the sequel, at least for characters and scenes that they're not really inherently comedic. But that's gonna do it for my positives, my mixed, and my negatives with Superman. And this is just gonna be my overall thoughts for the movie. And I think that this movie was a great return to form for the character of Superman, and it's definitely my favorite Superman movie to date. It's coming in at a great runtime at 2 hours, and it has excellent pacing, so I automatically put it above every other Superman film because most Superman films are slow. I think David Corenswet is literally Superman, and he embodies so much of the good in Superman while also giving him some flaws. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, and Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific are also standout performances as well. And I think James Gunn really broke out of his shell with this and showed that he can also do what he did for the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Suicide Squad, and the Creature Commandos for Superman. But I do think James Gunn could have restrained himself a little more with his comedy because that is my biggest negative with the film. But I do think him being the director and writer also gave this movie the heart that it needed to resonate with me emotionally. I do think this movie is worth spending your money to see on the biggest screen possible. And I feel like everybody in this climate and time that we live in definitely need a little bit of hope, and I think Superman came out at a perfect time to give the world that. But now to get into my scorecard for Superman, and on a star rating scale, I would give it a 4.5 out of 5. On a 10 scale, I would give it a 9 out of 10. And on my personal Noezone scale, I would give it a go out and buy the 4K Blu-ray for it. But that's gonna do it for my spoiler-free review on Superman. If you enjoyed my review, make sure you leave a like on the video. It really helps out the algorithm a lot. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more content like this and so that you never miss an upload. Make sure you share the video with a friend if you think they would enjoy it as well. Comment your thoughts on the new Superman movie. But as always, guys, it's been Noezone. Peace.